Welcome back to Revenge Stories, episode 101, where hidden truths are dragged into the light and traitors pay a very high price. Before we begin today's protagonist's dramatic pursuit of justice, don't forget to hit like and subscribe so you don't miss a single episode in this classic revenge series. Your support is what fuels our journey to uncover the truth. And now, brace yourselves. The game has begun. The face of the bank branch manager froze, shifting from polished professionalism to a deathly pale white. His fingers, just moments ago tapping rhythmically against the mahogany desk, began to tremble as soon as he saw the numbers on the screen. He swallowed hard, his breathing turning heavy, as if he had just unearthed some foul monster crawling up from the depths of an abyss. "Lock down all the main entrances immediately," he barked into the internal phone, his eyes never leaving me, "and call the federal police, now." He stared at me as if I had placed a grenade with the pin pulled on his desk, not a worn, cracked old savings passbook belonging to a long-dead man. A passbook that just yesterday my mother had ruthlessly tossed into the trash along with spoiled groceries, dismissing it with a bitter scoff as nothing more than worthless junk from a pathetic old man. She had been far too confident. She believed that secret would be buried with him forever. But some secrets don't stay quietly underground. Some of them grow sharp teeth and tear lies to shreds. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me start from the beginning. My name is Elena Vance. I'm 31 years old, and until that fateful morning, I thought the biggest problem in my life was my endless argument with my landlord about the broken heating system in my run-down apartment on the outskirts of Seattle. I work as a legal assistant at a small law firm downtown. The job isn't glamorous, the pay barely covers the basics, and my old car rattles and wheezes every time I start it like a dying creature. But I was good at my job. Why? Because I have a flaw my family always hated. I notice every tiny detail. I ask questions until I reach the truth. I never let go until every piece fits perfectly. It all began at my grandfather's funeral. Arthur Sterling died at the age of 89 on a quiet farm tucked behind old pine trees with a view of snow-capped Mount Rainier. To the outside world, Arthur was just a simple old man who spent his final years in relative poverty, surrounded by rooms that smelled of old books and rotting wood. That was exactly what my mother, Eleanor, wanted everyone to believe. The funeral took place on a gray Tuesday, typical of the Pacific Northwest. Eleanor organized it like a corporate event, cold, efficient, and meticulously calculated. 30 minutes for the ceremony, 45 minutes for tea, then everyone was to leave. No tears, no unnecessary eulogies. Eleanor believed emotions were a form of weakness, and weakness was not tolerated in her family. My brother, Julian, arrived 40 minutes late in a brand new Porsche worth more than my entire apartment. He walked in looking mildly inconvenienced, his eyes glued to his phone as he monitored stock portfolios. He didn't even pretend to grieve. Julian was Eleanor's perfect replica, a man who cared only about things that could be converted into cash or power. I stood in the corner of the room watching my family perform a play of fake mourning, and my heart quietly warmed at the thought of my grandfather. Arthur had been a brilliant forensic accountant for 40 years. Numbers weren't just his job, they were his language. He could look at a balance sheet and read crimes others had tried to hide. He was also an exceptional chess player. He taught me how to play when I was 7 on an old, drafty porch. He used to say, "Elena, chess isn't about how many pieces you take from your opponent. It's about creating positions, setting traps, and waiting patiently for the other side to make a mistake." And his favorite saying, the one I would only understand years later in its full brutality, "The truth is a real war. It can wait longer than any lie in this world." 2 weeks before he died, Arthur gripped my hand tightly. His eyes were sharp and startlingly clear inside his failing body. He whispered in a voice that was weak but urgent, "The savings passbook, in my study, inside the chess book. Only you, Elena. Promise me." After the funeral, Eleanor immediately began going through the rooms of the farmhouse, calculating what could be sold, even though my grandfather's body wasn't cold yet. I quietly slipped into his study. The smell of pipe tobacco and old paper still lingered in the air. I found it instantly. Endgame Chess Strategies, his favorite book. The moment I picked it up, I knew something was wrong. It was far too heavy. I opened the cover and caught my breath. The pages had been carefully hollowed out. Hidden inside was an old leather savings passbook, deep brown, the kind you only see in movies from the 1960s. I carried it into the living room intending to ask my mother about it. That was my first mistake. The instant Eleanor saw the passbook, her face changed. Her reaction was terrifyingly fast. She lunged forward, ripped it from my hands, and threw it straight into the trash without even opening it. "That's garbage," she hissed, her eyes filled with threat. "Those are dead accounts that were closed years ago. Stop digging through your grandfather's things, Elena. It's deeply disrespectful to the dead." Julian scoffed from the sofa. "You've always been delusional, Elena. Face it, what could that old man have left behind besides this pile of junk?" They exchanged a glance, so quick it was almost invisible. But I saw it. 8 years working in a law firm had taught me exactly what that look meant. It was the look of accomplices, the look of fear when someone brushes too close to the truth. That night, I couldn't sleep. Why would a worthless passbook provoke such rage? Why destroy it immediately instead of ignoring it? People react with aggression when they have something to hide. At 5 a.m. in the freezing Seattle dawn, I drove back to the farmhouse. I crept into the kitchen and dug through the trash like a desperate thief. When my fingers touched the rough leather cover beneath coffee grounds and food scraps, I knew it. Arthur Sterling's game had officially begun. I opened the passbook under the weak beam of a flashlight. The account number inside didn't match any outdated format from the 1960s. It was modern, clean, sharp. Tucked inside was a small slip of paper with my grandfather's handwriting. Account number 9928AX. They don't know about this. Request the full transaction history. Trust no one in the family. Only you, Elena. The drive to the bank took nearly 2 hours, cutting through the dense, rain-soaked forests of the Pacific Northwest. Seattle's skyline slowly faded in the rearview mirror, replaced by the oppressive gray fog of the Olympic Peninsula. I turned off the radio. The only sounds left were the steady thump of the windshield wipers and my own pounding heartbeat. My grandfather, Arthur Sterling, was an extremely meticulous man. He never did anything randomly. He didn't hide old savings passbooks inside hollowed-out chess books for sentimental reasons. He was a forensic accountant, a man who had spent 4 decades hunting white-collar criminals. He knew that numbers were the one thing in this world that could not lie. And I knew, deep in my bones, that Eleanor and Julian were terrified of those numbers. I arrived at a First National Trust branch in a small town called Silver Creek. It was the kind of bank that seemed frozen in time, heavy oak doors, brass fixtures, and the smell of floor polish mixed with stale coffee. I stepped inside, clutching my bag as if it held a holy relic. Inside were my ID, Arthur's death certificate, and the worn leather savings passbook. The teller was a young man with a polite, rehearsed smile. He took the passbook, scanned the account number, and began typing. Then he stopped. He blinked, stared at the screen, looked back at the passbook, and then at me. I need to get my manager," he whispered, his face draining of color. Then it happened, something I will never forget. A man in a sharp charcoal suit stepped out from the back office. This was Mr. Abernathy, the branch manager. He glanced at the electronic alert on the screen and his hands began to shake. He didn't just look surprised, he looked hunted. "Lock the front doors," he told his assistant, his voice tight, "and call the regional head of security immediately." He escorted me into a private, soundproof glass office. He sat across from me, the passbook resting on the desk between us like a live wire. "Ms. Vance," he began, his voice barely audible, "this account has been placed under deep freeze security status for nearly a decade. It's one of the highest flagged files in our entire regional system." "Why?" I asked, my throat dry. "Is it empty?" Abernathy didn't answer verbally. He took a slip of paper, wrote a number on it, and slid it across the desk. $25,742,189.84. The world spun. It felt as though the air had been ripped from my lungs. $25 million. My grandfather, the man who lived in a leaking farmhouse and wore sweaters from the 1990s, was a multi-millionaire. But the shock wasn't over. "This account wasn't opened in the 1960s, Ms. Vance," Abernathy explained. "Your grandfather used an old cover to disguise it. The funds were actually deposited in 2012, and the reason it was flagged wasn't just the balance, it was what happened in 2015. He pulled up a digital archive on the screen. 9 years ago, a woman named Eleanor Vance, your mother, presented a power of attorney. She attempted to liquidate the entire account and transfer the funds to an offshore entity in the Cayman Islands." A cold shiver ran down my spine. "Did she get it?" "No," Abernathy said, forcing a tight smile. "The signature verification system triggered an alert. It was a masterful forgery, but Arthur Sterling had embedded a hostile condition into his security instructions. He ordered the bank that if anyone, even himself, attempted to close the account without a specific 3-factor biometric verification, the account was to be immediately frozen and authorities notified." He leaned closer. "Your mother spent weeks trying to pressure this bank into releasing the funds. She claimed your grandfather was mentally incompetent and didn't understand his own wishes. But because she couldn't produce the original passbook, the one you're holding right now, she couldn't prove her claim to the disguised account. She was looking for a modern digital record. She never once thought to look inside a chessbook." The truth hit me like a physical blow. My mother wasn't just a cold woman, she was a predator. She had spent a decade trying to steal her father-in-law's fortune, and when she failed, she tried to convince the world he was a senile old man. "There's more," Abernathy continued, his expression darkening. "After the failed transfer, your grandfather came to this very office. He was terrified, Ms. Vance. He knew she would try again. He told us, 'If I die, do not contact my daughter-in-law. Do not contact my grandson. Wait for Elena. She is the only one who can see the truth.' I sat there in the silence of that office, the weight of $25 million and a decade of betrayal pressing down on me. My mother and Julian were merely managing assets. They were vultures who had been stripping Arthur to the bone while he was still alive, and now they were ready to feast. But they had made a fatal mistake. They thought I was weak because I was kind. They thought I was blind because I didn't care about their expensive cars and hollow titles. Arthur Sterling had spent his life hunting thieves, and in his final act, he had handed me the leash of his most dangerous hound. "Mr. Abernathy," I said, my voice firm and razor-sharp, "I want the complete transaction history of every account my mother has used in the past 10 years, and I want the contact information for the lead investigator in the Financial Crimes Division." I walked out of that bank into the pouring Seattle rain, but for the first time in my life, I didn't feel cold. I felt fire. The game wasn't over. Arthur had positioned the queen perfectly. Now it was my move.
The rain in Seattle didn't just fall, it haunted. It clung to the windshield, smearing the city's neon lights into warped streaks of red and blue. As I drove away from the bank, the slip of paper with that impossible number, $25,742,109.84, felt like it was burning through my leather bag. I was no longer just Elena Vance, the underpaid legal assistant with a car on its last breath. I was the custodian of a ghost's revenge. My next stop wasn't home. I couldn't go back to my apartment. I felt as if Eleanor's eyes were watching from everywhere. Instead, I drove to a secluded office in Pioneer Square, where buildings are made of old brick and the shadows feel centuries old. This was the law office of Harrison Thorne. Thorne had been my grandfather's closest friend for 40 years. When I called him from a disposable phone bought at a gas station, his voice was low and gravelly. "So it's time," he said. "Get here now, Elena. Don't let anyone follow you." His office was a fortress of mahogany and dust. Thorne himself looked as though he had been carved from ancient oak, stooped but unbroken, with eyes that had seen enough human greed for 3 lifetimes. He didn't offer me tea or make small talk. He simply pointed to a heavy, steel-reinforced briefcase resting on his desk. "Arthur knew this day would come," Thorne said, his voice echoing in the still room. "He spent the last decade of his life playing a defensive game of chess against your mother. He called it the eternal siege. He knew Eleanor was a shark, but even sharks drown when they're lured into waters too deep." He opened the briefcase. Inside wasn't money. It was something far more dangerous. Evidence. "Your grandfather was a forensic accountant, Elena," Thorne continued, sliding a thick file across the desk. "He didn't just track where money went, he tracked where it came from and the intent behind it. This is a record of every lie, every forged signature, and every medical consultation your mother arranged to have him declared mentally incompetent." I opened the file and my stomach twisted. It was a detailed map of sociopathic behavior. Eleanor hadn't just tried to steal money, she methodically planned Arthur's isolation. She paid a fraudulent doctor in Bellevue to write reports claiming Arthur suffered from early-onset dementia. She intercepted his mail, tapped his landline, and even rerouted his pension payments. But the most chilling part was a section titled Pattern. "Look at the dates, Elena," Thorne whispered. I did. In 2002, Eleanor's mother, my grandmother, had passed away. Records showed she passed away with nearly $300,000 in savings. By the time the estate was settled, the balance was zero. The money had simply vanished into a labyrinth of shell companies. Eleanor had practiced on her own mother before moving on to Arthur. What about my brother, Julian? How deep is he in this? Thorne pulled out a secondary file. Julian isn't just a beneficiary, Elena. He's a co-conspirator. Those investment portfolios he brags about, they were funded with money Eleanor siphoned from Arthur's smaller unprotected accounts between 2010 and 2015, roughly $4 million. Julian created a network of fake real estate holdings in Florida to launder it. My own brother. The man who mocked me for being too emotional at the funeral was wearing suits paid with stolen blood? Suddenly, my phone vibrated in my pocket. A text from Julian. "Hey sis, Mom's really worried. You haven't been answering calls. We're having a small dinner at the estate tonight to finalize the sale of the farm. You need to be there. Don't make this harder than it has to be." The audacity was breathtaking. They'd already sold Arthur's home, and now they wanted me there to witness the final looting. "They think they've won," I said, looking up at Thorne. The old lawyer leaned back, a predatory glint in his eyes. In chess, the most dangerous moment is when your opponent thinks you're down to your last pawn. They don't realize that pawn is about to reach the end of the board and become a queen. He handed me a small, encrypted USB drive. "Everything is on here, Elena. The forged documents, the offshore activity logs, the doctor's confession. Your grandfather didn't just track where money went, he tracked where it came from and the intent behind it." I drove away, the weight of it all pressing down on me, real, tangible. For years, I had been the quiet one in the family, the one who absorbed the insults and worked menial jobs while they lived in stolen luxury. They thought I was a bystander in their lives. They were wrong. I was the executioner. "Elena, what's the plan?" Thorne asked. I reread Julian's message. I could hear Arthur's voice in my head, whispering about patience and traps. "I'll go to that dinner," I said, my voice cold enough to freeze the rain outside. "I'll sit at their table, eat their food, and look them in the eye. I'll let them think they buried the truth." I stood, clutching the files. Because the best part of a trap isn't when it snaps shut. It's the moment right before, when the prey still believes it's safe. I stepped out of Thorne's office and back into the dark Seattle night. This game was no longer about money. It was about justice. And when the sun rose tomorrow, the name Sterling would mean something very different.
My grandfather Arthur's old farmhouse emerged through Seattle's heavy rain like a lonely ghost. The yellow light spilling from the living room windows didn't feel warm. If anything, it looked like the dim, watchful eyes of an owl. I parked my battered old car beside Julian's gleaming Porsche. The contrast felt like a slap to the face, a constant reminder of how they had wrapped themselves in luxury using my grandfather's money. I took a deep breath and touched my bag, where Thorne's encrypted USB and the old savings passbook rested. "Calm down, Elena," I told myself. "Tonight, you're not a legal assistant, you're an actress, and this is the most important performance of your life." The moment I stepped inside, the thick smell of rosemary and grilled meat filled the air. My mother, Eleanor, emerged from the kitchen wearing a smile so bright it was clearly manufactured. She was dressed in an expensive silk velvet gown, accessorized with a pearl necklace I knew had been bought with money siphoned from my grandfather's retirement account back in 2014. "Elena, sweetheart, you had us so worried," she said, stepping forward to hug me. I subtly shifted back, pretending to peel off my rain-soaked coat. "My car broke down on the way and my phone died. You know how it is. I can't afford new things like Julian," I replied, lightly masking the storm raging beneath the surface. Julian stepped out of the study, a glass of red wine in his hand, wearing that familiar smug expression. "Don't worry, little sister. Once we sell this farm, Mom will set aside a small consolation fee for you, enough to buy a car that doesn't groan every time it goes uphill." Dinner unfolded in a haze of forced civility and real estate talk. Eleanor and Julian spoke excitedly about a developer from California who had agreed to buy the land at twice the market value. I listened silently, replaying the files Thorne had given me in my mind. The so-called California developer was nothing more than a shell company called Sterling Global Investments, registered in Julian's name. They were selling the land to themselves to launder my grandfather's stolen money before disappearing into offshore accounts. A bold move, but far too sloppy for someone trained in law. "You're awfully quiet tonight, Elena," Eleanor said, her sharp eyes slowing as they studied me. "You didn't keep that old savings passbook you found in your grandfather's room, did you? I've thought about it. Even though it's worthless, if you want it as a keepsake, I'll let you keep it." "I threw it away," I lied, without blinking, taking a bitter sip of wine. "You were right. It was just trash. I don't want reminders of his misery." I saw Eleanor relax, a visible easing of tension. She believed me. To her, I was still the weak, easily manipulated daughter. "Good," Julian cut in. "Now here's the authorization paperwork for selling the farm. Since you're one of the legal heirs, you need to sign this so we can move forward." He slid a folder toward me. I skimmed it. It was a trap. If I signed, I wouldn't just be approving the sale. I'd be relinquishing control over every bank account connected to Arthur Sterling. "I need to use the restroom," I said, standing up and deliberately leaving my bag on the chair so they could see I wasn't hiding anything. I headed down the hallway, but the moment I was out of sight, I slipped into my grandfather's study instead. I had less than 3 minutes. Julian's laptop sat open on the desk. He'd clearly been working on his shell companies before dinner. I pulled the USB from my sweater pocket and plugged it in. The tracking software Thorne provided sprang to life. It didn't just copy data, it planted a Trojan virus in Julian's system, silently transmitting every transaction record to the servers of Inspector Marcus Reed at the Financial Crimes Bureau. My heart slammed against my ribs. Every second stretched into an eternity. 50%, 80%, 100%. "Elena, what's taking you so long in there?" Julian's voice called from the hallway. I yanked out the USB, slipped it back into my pocket, and turned just as Julian pushed the door open. I was holding an old framed photo of my grandfather from the bookshelf, my eyes distant. I miss him, I said softly, an impeccable performance. Julian exhaled, his expression shifting from suspicion to annoyance. Enough of that. Don't be childish. Come sign the papers so we can finish this. Back at the table, I picked up the pen. Eleanor watched me intently, like a hawk waiting for the final strike. I signed my name, but instead of my usual signature, I added a small symbol at the end, a mark my grandfather and I used in chess to indicate a trap. Checkmate, Mom, I thought. When I left the farmhouse that night, Eleanor hugged me and told me she was proud of me. I smiled, a smile colder than the Seattle rain lashing against my face. They thought they had won. They thought they had buried the truth along with my grandfather's coffin. They didn't realize that justice doesn't always arrive with thunder and lightning. Sometimes it comes quietly, through numbers whispering in the dark, through a granddaughter they always underestimated, and through the infinite ripple of a man who spent his life hunting people just like them. The greatest lesson my grandfather ever taught me wasn't how to win a chess match. It was how to face monsters. If you want to catch a devil, he used to say, you have to show them the heaven they crave, and then pull the ground out from underneath their feet. Tonight, Eleanor and Julian are sleeping peacefully in their fake paradise, but tomorrow's dawn will bring a storm that no amount of money can stop. The next morning, Seattle greeted me with a slate-gray sky and wind howling through the cracks in my windows. But I no longer felt this city's cold. In my veins, a fire was burning. At exactly 7 a.m., my phone vibrated once, a short, sharp alert. An encrypted message from the Trojan virus appeared. Access granted, synchronizing data. Julian had opened his laptop in his home office. Every transaction, every shell account, every trace of money laundering was now being dragged into the light. I took a deep breath and sent a concise message to Inspector Marcus Reed. Bait taken. Meet at the bank. I drove to Silver Creek again, but this time I didn't enter through the front door. Mr. Abernathy, the branch manager who had once trembled at the sight of my passbook, was waiting at the rear entrance. With him stood a woman wearing wire-rimmed glasses and a sharply tailored power suit. "Good morning, Miss Vance. I'm Sarah Jenkins, Regional Director of Security for First National Trust," she said, extending her hand. "What you brought us has caused significant disruption within our system. We've now re-verified everything." They led me into a secure facility buried deep beneath the bank. The silence was so complete I could hear my own heartbeat. On a large screen, a familiar number glowed. 25,742,109 and 84 cents. It was still there, solid, undeniable. But Sarah Jenkins pressed another key and a second display lit up, glowing red like spilled blood. "This is what your mother, Eleanor Sterling, carried out between 2010 and 2015, Sarah said, her tone cold and professional. "She withdrew a total of $4.2 million from your grandfather's secondary accounts. The method was sophisticated, structured transfers below federal reporting thresholds, and forged signatures of Arthur Sterling on cash withdrawal orders." "And where did the money go?" I asked, though I already knew. "It was funneled through a shell company called Green Horizon Landscaping, then redirected into real estate investment vehicles registered under Julian Vance. Your brother didn't build his wealth through market talent. He built it by carving your grandfather apart piece by piece." A wave of clarity washed over me. $4.2 million. That was the cost of the years my grandfather spent confined to his own home, reduced to a senile old man in the eyes of the world. "But there's something more important than money," Mr. Abernathy interjected, placing a small metal box on the table, retrieved from the bank's most secure private vault. "Your grandfather left this behind. He instructed us to give it to you only if you returned with the leather savings assbook." Inside lay an old digital voice recorder and a single sealed inheritance directive. With trembling fingers, I pressed play. Arthur Sterling's voice filled the room, calm, steady, carrying the quiet force of a coming storm. "Elena, my little girl, if you're hearing this, it means you're strong enough to face the darkness in our family. Don't cry for me. Money was never the goal. It was only the tool. That $25 million isn't an inheritance. It's the final snare. A soft chuckle followed, the sound I remembered from countless chess victories. I deliberately allowed the smaller accounts to remain visible, knowing Eleanor's greed would take the bait. I needed her to leave footprints. I needed her to write her own confession. As for the $25 million, it's protected by a system that requires my true biometric signature and your physical presence to activate. Now it all belongs to you, Elena. Use it to restore justice. Use it to purge the Sterling name of their lies. Remember, truth can wait, but it never quits. The recording ended in a long, peaceful silence. I sat motionless in the stone-walled vault. My grandfather had spent his final years in isolation, pretending to be weak, accepting humiliation, using his own life as a sacrificial piece to set a perfect trap for those who betrayed him. He had given himself to protect me and to make justice inevitable. Miss Vance, Sarah Jenkins broke the silence. As the legal owner of this account, you have the authority to immediately freeze all transactions linked to Julian Vance and Eleanor Sterling that show evidence of misappropriation. Would you like to exercise that authority? I stood, wiping away the last of my tears. My gaze was razor sharp now. Not just freeze them, I said, my voice echoing through the vault. I want the bank's legal team to coordinate directly with Inspector Marcus Reed. We'll let them take one more step. I want Julian to personally transfer the final sum from his shell company into a secure holding account we'll establish right now. I looked at the $25 million glowing on the screen. It was no longer money, it was medicine. My grandfather spent 10 years preparing this board. I won't end the game quickly. I want them to feel absolute control, right up until they realize everything they built is nothing but sandcastles and the tide is already coming. I stepped out of the bank. Seattle was still raining, but the sky felt brighter somehow. I pulled out my phone and called my mother. Mom, I've been thinking about the farm sale. I think we should throw a small celebration dinner this Friday night at the farmhouse. I'll invite my lawyer so we can finalize everything properly. On the other end, Eleanor's voice purred, sweet as poisoned honey. My sensible daughter, that's the best decision you've ever made. I smiled, a smile that, if Eleanor could see it, would have frozen her blood. It was the same smile Arthur Sterling wore just before driving his opponent into checkmate. Yes, Mom, I said softly, a decision that will change all of our lives forever.
Inspector Marcus Reed's office at the Financial Crimes Bureau was housed in an aging technical building in downtown Seattle, heavy with the smell of black coffee and dust from decades-old case files. Marcus Reed was a man in his 50s, with tired yet razor-sharp eyes, the kind that could look past columns of numbers and see the devastation underneath. When I stepped inside, Reed was staring at the live data streaming in from the virus I had planted on Julian's computer. He didn't look up, only spoke. Ms. Vance, I've worked financial crimes for 20 years. I've seen everything, from Wall Street fraud to international money laundering networks. But your family? He paused. They're a completely different kind of monster. I sat across from him, feeling the weight of the thick case files stacked on his desk. What did you find, Inspector? Reed turned the monitor toward me. We ran a deep analysis on your mother, Eleanor Sterling, and we found a horrifying common denominator. You see, Elena, the death of your grandfather wasn't the first time Eleanor has done this. He pulled out an aged, yellowed file marked 2002. It was the case record of my grandmother's death, Eleanor's own mother. In 2002, your grandmother died of what was ruled age-related exhaustion. She had personal savings of approximately $300,000, a substantial sum at the time. But in the 6 months before her death, the entire amount vanished. Records showed she had voluntarily transferred the funds into a healthcare account. But do you know whose name was on that account? He met my eyes. Eleanor's. A cold current shot down my spine. She stripped her own mother? That's not all, Reed continued, his voice hardening. Neighbors reported Eleanor isolated the elderly woman, cut her off from friends and other relatives. but there was no physical evidence, and Eleanor produced medical documentation claiming her mother suffered from dementia. The case was closed. She walked free. Arthur Sterling wasn't just an accountant. He was an observer. He had watched Eleanor drain her own mother step by step, and when my father died in 2009, Arthur knew he had become the next target. Your grandfather knew he was living with a financial predator. That's why he began constructing what we now call the Sterling Fortress. He wasn't just hiding money, he was documenting her every move like a hunter setting a trap. That leather savings passbook you found, it proves the $25 million account existed in parallel with the smaller accounts Eleanor was exploiting. It establishes Arthur's full mental capacity and completely dismantles any claim of incompetence. As I stared at the files, a truth even more brutal emerged. Julian, my brother, hadn't just benefited. In 2002, when my grandmother died, Julian was 18. He had witnessed what his mother did, and instead of stopping her, he learned from her. He was the one who later suggested using online banking and shell companies to cover their tracks with my grandfather's money. "She taught her son to become a demon," I whispered, my fists clenched white. "Yes," Reed nodded, "and now we've traced the stolen funds into Julian's Florida-based virtual real estate network, 6 shell companies in total, Sterling Global, Azure Palms, Suncoast Holdings, all designed for one purpose, to fully launder the $4.2 million they stole before Arthur Sterling died." Reed looked me straight in the eye, his voice grave. "Elena, we have enough evidence to arrest them right now for fraud and money laundering, but if you want to reclaim the full $25 million and charge them with aggravated elder exploitation and large-scale asset theft, we need them to make one final move." "Friday night's dinner," I said, certainty ringing in my voice. "Exactly," Reed replied with a thin, cold smile. "We'll have them sign documents acknowledging receipt of the $25 million from you, a confirmation that they were fully aware of its existence and attempted to seize it. That will be the final nail in their legal coffin." I stood and caught my reflection in the reinforced glass wall of the office. The weak legal assistant was gone. In her place, I saw Arthur Sterling's reflection, sharp, deliberate, and cold. My grandfather used to say, "The greatest hunter is the one who convinces the prey they're the hunter." Eleanor and Julian are staring into a mirror and seeing millionaires. They don't realize that mirror is actually a steel cage. I turned back to Reed. "Prepare the arrest warrants. I'll prepare the dinner. And Marcus, make sure when the police come in, they're at the absolute peak of their triumph. I want them to fall from the highest possible height." Ignoring the rain warnings, I drove back toward downtown Seattle. The city lit up in neon, beautiful, deceptive, and full of traps. This game was no longer about money. It was about purging a bloodline that had been poisoned. Eleanor Sterling got away with it 20 years ago because she believed history would repeat itself. This time, her opponent wasn't a frail old woman. It was someone forged in the shadow of injustice. "Checkmate, Mom," I whispered into the air, where Arthur Sterling's spirit was likely smiling.
Harrison Thorne's office in Pioneer Square was as silent and shadowed as the last time I'd slipped through its door. The air smelled of old paper and scented backs, giving the impression that this was the only place in Seattle where time had simply stopped. Thorne sat behind his mahogany desk, his eyes fixed on me with quiet contemplation. "Arthur chose you, Elena, not because you carry his blood, but because you carry the integrity your father once had," Thorne said, his voice low and heavy. He slid a dark blue folder toward me, stamped "Confidential" across the front. It was what I had been waiting for, and what I had feared most. "What's in here is the most severe case of medical abuse I've ever seen," Thorne continued. "To have Arthur legally declared incompetent, Eleanor bribed a psychiatrist named Dr. Silas Vane in Bellevue. She paid him handsomely to prescribe Arthur a cocktail of heavy psychoactive medications.
These drugs weren't meant to treat anything. They were meant to make him compliant, confused, and easily judged unfit in front of officials. I flipped through the file. Secret wire transfers, lethal prescriptions, fabricated medical reports. My breath caught when I read one of Dr. Vane's notes. Patient showing signs of resistance. Dosage must be increased to maintain a state of legal incapacity. They poisoned him in his own home, I said, my voice shaking with rage. Yes, Thorne nodded, but Arthur was a forensic accountant. He noticed the bitterness in his tea early on. He pretended to swallow the pills, then spit them out. He played the role of a fading old man so Eleanor and Julian would lower their guard. For 4 years, he lived inside a survival performance, right under the noses of the people waiting for him to die. But the most horrifying truth waited on the final page. A document tied to my father's death in 2009. Your father didn't die in a simple traffic accident, Thorne said, pain flashing in his eyes. That night, he discovered Eleanor was secretly siphoning money from Arthur's accounts to cover her gambling losses in the stock market. They fought, violently. Police reports said your father drove off in an agitated state, but Arthur hired an independent mechanic to inspect the car afterward. Thorne paused. The brake line had been cut. The world seemed to go silent around me. My father, the gentle man who loved me without conditions, had died because of his own wife's greed. Arthur never told you because he wanted to protect you from your mother's poison, Thorne said, resting a hand on my shoulder, but he left behind a notarized declaration documenting everything he uncovered. He signed it in 2022 when he knew his time was running out. I opened the declaration. My grandfather's handwriting was firm and precise, just like the man himself. I, Arthur Sterling, being fully lucid and of sound mind, write this statement as testimony to the crimes of Eleanor Vance and her son, Julian. They stole from me, they exploited me, and above all, they destroyed my family. I leave all evidence in the care of my granddaughter, Elena Vance. Elena, you are the final hope of this bloodline. Finish this game for me. I closed the file. The pain inside me had transformed into something colder, sharper, controlled. I was no longer a grieving granddaughter. I was the executor of Arthur Sterling's will. Mr. Thorne, I said calmly, almost eerily so, can you contact Dr. Silas Vane? Let him know the Financial Crimes Bureau now has proof of his offshore accounts. Offer him one chance to cooperate as a state witness if he wants to avoid a 20-year sentence. Thorne smiled, deeply satisfied. You really are Arthur's reflection, Elena. You know exactly how to sacrifice the weakest piece to collapse the board. I stood, folder in hand. Outside, Seattle was still wrapped in mist, but inside, everything had never been clearer. Friday night's dinner at the farm would no longer be a simple signing. It would be a public execution, right there at the dining table. Julian and Eleanor were expecting luxury. They were waiting for the final glittering moment of $25 million. They didn't know that every dollar they touched carried a testimony, and every step they took had already been calculated by a dead man. Are you ready, Elena? Thorne asked as I reached the door. I turned back, my eyes burning. I'm not ready, Mr. Thorne. I'm waiting, and it's time the traitors learned this. The truth is a real war, and when it strikes, it leaves no escape. I stepped out into Pioneer Square, feeling justice breathing down my neck. Tonight, I would prepare the dinner, and tomorrow, the Sterling family would witness a reckoning Seattle would whisper about for years to come.
If my mother, Eleanor, was the architect of these poisonous schemes, then my brother Julian was the engineer, the one who executed them beneath a flawless financial facade. Julian had always been the pride of the Sterling family, a man with a prestigious degree, a polished investment expert whose face appeared in local business magazines. But as I sat in the dim room with Inspector Marcus Reed, the portrait of my perfect brother began to fracture into something grotesque. "He's not just greedy, Elena," Reed said, pointing at the tangled money flow diagram on the whiteboard. "Julian is a professional money launderer. He turned your grandfather's estate into a machine designed to kill money cleanly." Reed handed me a highly detailed audit file on Sterling Global Investment, LLC. "Julian founded this company in 2016, Reed continued. "It's registered under a middle alias, Garrett. Over the last 8 years, more than $6 million has been funneled into it from accounts your mother siphoned money from, Arthur's money. But look at what Sterling Global actually invested in: phantom real estate projects along the Florida coast, resorts that exist only on paper." I stared at the numbers. Julian hadn't just received money from our mother, he had proactively built an entire network of shell companies: Azure Palms, Suncoast Holdings, Pinecrest Realty. Every time Eleanor stole a chunk from Arthur's accounts, Julian would legitimize it by turning it into fake investment profits through those companies. That money bought the Porsche, the $5,000 suits, the penthouse overlooking Elliott Bay. Everything the world admired about him, his wealth, intelligence, and success, had been built on the suffering and isolation of his own elderly grandfather. "You know what's almost funny?" Reed said dryly. "Julian was too confident. He believed that once Arthur had been declared legally incompetent, there would never be an audit." At that moment, my phone vibrated. Julian. He had sent me a photo of the farm sale contract, signed with the alias I'd used. "All done, little sister. Mom's thrilled. The first transfer will hit Monday morning. See you at Friday night's dinner. Don't dress too modestly. Some important partners of mine will be there." My stomach churned. Important partners. Probably the brokers helping him scrub the final stains clean. "That's what it feels like to fall into a trap, Marcus," I said coldly, "to genuinely believe the game is already over." "We'll let him enjoy the victory a little longer," Reed nodded. "My team has already frozen Julian's offshore accounts. The moment he initiates the commission transfer from the farm sale into those Florida shell companies on Friday night, it becomes undeniable evidence of money laundering and federal fraud. That's no longer civil liability, Eleanor. That's a level 1 felony." I stood and walked to the window, looking down at Seattle's streets as the lights flickered on. I remembered the final chess game I played with my grandfather. He sacrificed his knight to protect the king, but in truth, it was a trap that lured the opponent's queen into an irreversible position. Julian always thought he was the queen on this board, able to move anywhere, control everything. He forgot that in chess, the more powerful the queen, the more devastating the fall when she's trapped. I turned back to Reed. "Inspector, make sure Julian's arrest happens right in front of those important partners. I want the family's golden son to experience his absolute lowest moment the instant the handcuffs snap around the wrist that's always worn a Rolex." Reed smiled, the smile of a hunter who finally has his prey in the crosshairs. "Miss Vance, you truly carry Arthur Sterling's blood. This kind of precision is terrifying." I left the bureau with my thoughts fixed on Friday night's dinner. I had prepared a special gift for my brother. Not money, not fake family affection, the truth. And the truth, when sharpened by justice, cuts through every lie no matter how elegantly it's wrapped. 48 hours left. The Sterling family dinner would be the traitor's last supper, and I, Elena Vance, would be the one serving the final course, the collapse of lies. On Friday, Seattle unleashed a torrential rain, as if trying to wash every sin from the city's streets. At the old Sterling family farm, crystal chandeliers blazed with light, reflecting off fine porcelain and glittering wine glasses. The air was thick with the scent of gourmet dishes, a celebratory victory dinner Eleanor and Julian had meticulously prepared to toast their coming fortune.
Eleanor wore a luxurious crimson velvet gown, her smile radiant like a queen reclaiming her kingdom. Julian stood beside her, wineglass in hand, enthusiastically describing multi-million-dollar Florida real estate projects to two unfamiliar men, people he introduced as strategic partners, though I knew they were undercover agents planted by Inspector Reed. I entered the dining room in a simple black dress. Eleanor's and Julian's gazes snapped toward me, a flicker of condescension crossing their faces. In their world, I was still poor little Elena, the quiet paralegal who dreamed foolishly about justice. "Elena, my dear, you look so elegant," Eleanor said, her voice sweet as poisoned honey. "Sit down. Tonight is important. We're finalizing the sale of the farm and beginning a new life, the life your grandfather always wanted." I took my seat, facing the people who had poisoned the mind of the man I loved most. The roast chicken was served, dry and flavorless, exactly as I expected, a perfect metaphor for Eleanor herself, obsessed with appearances, empty within. "You're right, Mother," I smiled, a smile that would have terrified them if they were paying closer attention. "Grandfather always wanted the truth to come out, and tonight the truth is our guest of honor." Julian scoffed, swirling his wine. "You've always loved dramatic nonsense, Elena, but let's be real. The only thing that matters is numbers, and tonight we'll sign the final documents transferring $25 million from Grandfather's trust into my investments. You'll get your share. Relax." He slid a thick folder toward me. "This is the commission and capital transfer order. Just sign as a co-heir and it'll all be done in 5 minutes." I took the pen, feeling its weight. This was the move Inspector Reed and the bank had been waiting for. The moment I signed and Julian executed the transfer on the open laptop, the system would record irrefutable evidence of embezzlement and money laundering in real time. "Are you sure about this, Julian?" I asked, locking eyes with him. "Once it's signed, there's no turning back." "Sign it, Elena. Don't waste everyone's time," Eleanor snapped, impatience cracking through her polished facade. Greed was screaming inside her. I signed decisively. Julian snatched the folder, triumph spreading across his face. He typed rapidly on the laptop, executing the final transfer. "Done," Julian cheered, raising his glass. "Congratulations to us, to the wealth of the Sterling family." Eleanor laughed loudly and stepped toward me for an embrace. I stood, taking a step back. The cold in my eyes freeze her. "Do you know the most interesting thing about chess?" I asked, my voice echoing as the room fell silent. When players think they've captured the queen, they often fail to notice that the knight has already been positioned for checkmate. "What are you talking about, Julian?" Frowned, suspicion finally creeping in. "Grandfather taught me this," I said, picking up the remote and turning on the large television in the living room. "The truth is a weapon. It can wait longer than any lie." The screen didn't show a financial channel, but a live feed from First National Trust's security system, alongside diagrams of Julian's corporate network lighting up red as accounts were frozen by the Financial Crimes Bureau. Julian's face drained of color in seconds. He lunged for the laptop. What is this? My accounts are locked? Sterling Global? Suncoast? All frozen?" Eleanor staggered, her pearl necklace trembling with each sharp breath. "Elena, what did you do?" "I didn't do anything, Mother," I said calmly, my voice as still as a windless lake. "I only gave Grandfather back the voice you stole from him for 10 years. I'm just carrying out the will of the man you dismissed as a senile old fool." At that moment, the two partners stood up. Their friendly investor masks fell away, replaced by the authority of law enforcement. "Julian Vance, Eleanor Sterling," one announced, flashing his badge. "Undercover agents, Financial Crimes Bureau. You are arrested for financial fraud, money laundering, forgery, and systematic exploitation of an elderly individual." Police sirens wailed outside the farm gates, blue and red lights slicing through the Seattle rain. Eleanor collapsed into her chair, red wine spilling across her expensive dress like a fresh wound. Julian shouted for his lawyer, struggled uselessly as handcuffs clamped around the wrist that had always worn a Rolex. I stood there, watching the people who once treated me as disposable being led away in disgrace. The dinner was over, but my grandfather Arthur's game had finally reached its end. "It really did take long enough," I whispered as the police cars vanished into the rain-soaked darkness.
The season's first snow began to fall, laying a pristine white veil over the red brick streets of Pioneer Square. 3 months had passed since the fateful dinner at the Sterling family estate. My world had changed completely, not because of the $25 million now sitting in an account, but because of the peace of mind I once believed I had lost forever. The trial of Eleanor and Julian Sterling unfolded under intense scrutiny from the Seattle media. I sat in the front row, watching my mother, the woman who once shimmered in velvet and silk, now reduced to a frail figure in a bright orange prison uniform. Julian, the family's former golden son, sat beside her, his face hollow and vacant. The arrogant confidence that once defined him had evaporated, replaced by the naked fear of a man finally facing consequences. The prosecutor presented evidence that left no room for denial. Thousands of pages of digital forensic reports, offshore banking records, and, most damning of all, the explosive testimony of Dr. Silas Vane, who had chosen to surrender and cooperate in exchange for leniency. He confessed to systematically falsifying Arthur Sterling's mental capacity under Eleanor's orders. When my grandfather Arthur's sworn statement was read aloud in the courtroom, the entire room fell silent. His voice from the past sounded like a death sentence for their lies. The final verdicts were delivered. Eleanor Sterling, 18 years in prison for involuntary manslaughter linked to my father, systematic elder abuse, and federal document forgery. All of her assets were seized to compensate the Arthur Sterling estate. Julian Vance, 8 years in prison for money laundering and conspiracy to commit financial fraud. The career of the so-called investment expert was over, forever stained beyond repair. After the hearing, attorney Harrison Thorne invited me to his office one last time. He handed me a sealed envelope, handled with meticulous care. "Arthur instructed me to give this to you after justice was fully served," Thorne said softly. I opened the letter. My grandfather Arthur's handwriting appeared, steady, deep, unmistakable. "My dearest Elena, if you are reading this, the game of chess has finally ended. I'm sorry that I placed such a heavy burden on you, forcing you to be the one who sent your own mother and brother to prison, but I knew you were the only one with eyes capable of seeing the truth and a heart strong enough to protect it. Julian was always his mother's son. He learned to worship money as life's ultimate goal. You, on the other hand, loved me not for the numbers in a bank book, but for the afternoons we spent playing chess on the porch. You did not win because you gained $25 million. You won because you preserved the moral integrity of the Sterling bloodline. This money is not meant for luxury. Use it to build something of value. Live also for your father, who never lived long enough to see you grow into the woman you are. Remember my words. The truth can wait, but it will never betray those who stand by it. With all my love, Grandfather Arthur Sterling." I folded the letter, tears streaming down my face. I wasn't crying from sorrow. I was crying from release. My grandfather had settled everything. He had prepared a future for me where justice and love could walk side by side.
6 months later, I used part of the inheritance to purchase a historic building in downtown Seattle and transform it into the Sterling Heritage Library, a free legal aid library and support center for elderly victims of financial exploitation. In one corner of the library, I placed my grandfather's chess table, where anyone could sit down and learn how to see ahead before making life's next move. My mother still writes letters from prison from time to time, letters filled with blame, resentment, and pleas for money. I do not reply. Some doors, once closed, deserve to remain in the past. Julian is learning how to survive in prison, where tailored suits and credit cards hold no value. Stepping out of the library under the gentle Seattle afternoon sun, I looked up at the sky and smiled faintly. I was no longer a timid legal assistant hiding behind other people's shadows. I am Elena Vance, the woman who completed the final move in Arthur Sterling's game of chess. Lessons and message to the audience. The story of the Sterling family is not merely a tale of financial crime. It is a profound lesson about human nature and the power of justice. The truth is always more patient than lies. As Arthur Sterling said, lies may run fast, but the truth wins the marathon of life. Never be afraid to stand on the side of truth, even if you stand alone. Greed has no bottom. Eleanor and Julian had everything, status, wealth, and family, yet greed blinded them, and in the end they lost what mattered most: freedom and dignity. Money is only a tool. If you let it rule you, it will drag you into the abyss. Family exists for love, not profit. Blood ties are not a license for wrongdoing. Justice does not discriminate between strangers and kin. Protecting a family's true values sometimes requires the courage to cut away what has become corrupt. Courage is the ultimate weapon. Elena won because she knew how to wait, how to observe, and how to strike at the right moment. In life, the most powerful move is not the fastest one, but the one calculated with precision. Thank you for accompanying Revenge Stories 101 through all 10 parts of this series. We hope Elena Vance's journey has given you strong emotions and meaningful reflections about life. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to continue supporting our channel as we bring you more intense stories of justice and retribution. If you have a story about fairness and truth, share it in the comments. And now, goodbye and see you at the next game of chess. The truth is very patient. It can wait longer than any lie.